welcome to today's webinar, Internal Audit for Nonprofit Organizations. I am Melissa Musser, and I will be your moderator today. All right, well, we have exciting news to share. Gelman, Rosenberg, and Friedman is now GRF CPAs and Advisors. The new name and logo reflect our firm's growing risk advisory service practice, where we've been providing more holistic solutions to our clients in addition to our traditional audit and tax services. All right, I'd like to start off the webinar with some quick housekeeping items and explain what you will need to do to earn CPE credit. Participants seeking CPE credit today must complete and submit a short evaluation survey that will appear automatically immediately following the webinar. You will be asked to recall certain CPE words in order to receive credit. Please write down the CPE words when they are given and keep them until you receive your certificate. They will not be provided again. If you have any technical questions or issues during the webinar, please use the questions function to speak with our webinar administrator for assistance. This slide deck and recording from today's webinar will be available for download. You will also receive a follow-up email with direct links so you can download. All right, sorry about that. Today's learning objective is to provide attendees with a better understanding of the role of internal audit and the characteristics of an effective internal audit function for nonprofit organizations. One CPE credit is available for this webinar. All right, now to our presenters. Again, my name is Melissa Musser. I am a principal in the Risk Advisory Services practice for GRF. I spent several years managing global internal audit departments, and I now work for GRF, leading the risk advisory practice where we focus on ERM, enterprise risk management, internal audit, fraud, and IT cybersecurity services. We have a passion for being of service to nonprofit organizations, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. And now I will turn it over to Mark.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Tesser. I am an audit supervisor with GRF CPAs and Advisors. I just want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. I'm excited that so many people are interested in learning more about internal audit and how it can be applied at nonprofit organizations. So just a little bit of a background on me. I have 10 years of audit experience, 5 of which was spent in various internal audit roles at publicly traded companies. The other half of my career has been dedicated to advising and providing internal and external audit services to nonprofit organizations. So the types of nonprofits I've worked with include large international NGOs, trade associations, social advocacy groups, and foundations. I definitely have a passion for working with nonprofit organizations and helping my clients enhance and implement effective controls to achieve their missions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andreas to introduce himself.
Very good. Thank you, Mark. Thank you all for joining today. My name is Andreas Alexandru. I have been with GRF CPAs and Advisors for 24 years. And during the majority of my time here at GRF CPAs and Advisors, I have been active in our auditing group, and our audit group is almost exclusively focused on not-for-profit organizations. My current role with the organization is I'm a partner in our audit department, and during my time with the firm, I have worked with all different kinds of not-for-profit organizations, including trade associations, private foundations, local and national public charities, and my concentration is very heavy in international non-governmental organizations, international NGOs. And as a part of working in audit, there's also a subset of our work here that is focused on risk and advisory services. I'm active with our risk and advisory services group. And I also, on an ongoing basis, do perform a number of special assignments, including external and internal audits of organizations and branch offices, as well as local NGOs throughout the world. And we also do a fair amount of sub-grantee audits, both domestic and international engagements, which are quite unique in the sense that there are a variety of issues related to operating on an international level. We'll talk about some of those issues throughout this presentation today. Okay. As a part of our webinar today, we'll be reviewing some of the areas that you have here in the highlights and objectives section. I will first start out talking a little bit about the firm and what we do. Very good, thank you. And a little bit about the organization. We have been in business for roughly 38 years now. Our firm was originally established as a traditional CPA firm with a heavy concentration in tax. And over time, our practice has evolved from growing the tax practice to really growing our audit business. And our audit business has evolved over time to the point where at this moment in time, it represents roughly 70 to 75% of our entire firm business. Now that said, there's also a very strong growing tax practice, and within that tax practice is a variety of subset businesses and other kinds of services that we are providing. But again, our audit group represents the largest piece of what we do. We also have an outsourced advisory and accounting services group that serves hundreds of different organizations, and that group is focused on controllership engagements, payroll, write-up, bookkeeping, tax planning, and a variety of other accounting and related services. We do have a group that is focused on pensions, and so there's a bit of pensions and other kinds of advisory services that our growing pension group is focused in on. We also have, as a part of our audit practice, we do have a not-for-profit tax group that's built into our audit group that is focused exclusively on serving not-for-profit organizations on an annual basis. That group will work on roughly 900 Form 990s and related tax forms that are exclusive, again, just to not-for-profit organizations, and there's a variety of tax and other consultative services that group provides. And we work hand in hand in serving our not-for-profit clients. And our most recent addition to our organization is our risk and advisory practice. The risk and advisory practice provides a variety of services. Some of the most interesting and unique ones to our risk and advisory services practice includes enterprise risk management engagements, cybersecurity, third-party risk reviews, privacy and GDPR reviews, fraud support, compliance consulting, financial systems optimization, and of course, internal audit, which is why we are here today. And some of the important points that we'll make during the course of the webinar today are really a function of our experience. Our practice is a very unique one in the sense that we have visited over 100 countries in the context of audit of US-based organizations as well as foreign organizations and other groups, subgrantees of US corporations, US not-for-profit organizations, and foreign organizations. And those engagements have taken us all over the world to some of the most challenging places on the planet. And with that, with the experience, it has allowed us to develop a keen sense of the needs for our clients, both in the context of external audit as well as internal audit. And throughout the engagements that we're performing for both external and internal audit, there is a lot of context that has been gained through some of the on-site activities that are a part of any annual audit engagement or any internal audit engagement that we are providing for our clients. This particular slide is an overview of the risk advisory services that we are providing in the context specifically as we're looking at enterprise risk management. And enterprise Enterprise risk management, also known as ERM, is a holistic approach to taking a look at an organization's risk. And there are different elements of the risk universe that an organization should be considering. And why is it important? It is important for a variety of reasons. More so importantly, growing as far as the need for enterprise risk management in recent years. At least in the past 5 years, the entire risk universe has become quite complicated for a variety of reasons. Technology is one of the most significant reasons. And so the amount of risk that every organization has been exposed to just in the last 5 years, again, primarily because of technology and other concerns, hits home the need for organizations to have a holistic approach to managing risk. And so as we talk about risk, most folks think of financial risk. And so, okay, well, we manage financial risk through annual audits and other kinds of compliance examinations, but that's just one pillar or one element of the entire risk universe that an organization needs to consider. And so some of the things that an organization should be considering as it looks at the entire risk universe is what you see here: strategic, reputational, financial, fraud, and all the way down to third party. And it is important to also consider that ERM is just it's something that you can look at it again holistically, or you can take a look at some of the slices of ERM or some of the pillars of ERM. Internal audit is a very important part of the ERM process, and we'll talk in more detail about what internal audit entails and what are the important areas of internal audit that we should be considering. But again, a lot of this is focused on risk and risk tolerance and how an organization approaches its annual sort of examination of the risk elements, and every organization is designed a little bit differently. And so as you take a look at the risk universe of the organization, there may be pieces that are more important to your organization versus another one. So there is no cookie cutter approach to enterprise risk management, and there's no cookie cutter approach specifically to internal audit. And so with that, I will pass it over to Mark Tesser.
Thanks, Andreas. So first and foremost, I just want to kind of lay the groundwork for the rest of our presentation. Basically, internal audit is not a new concept. It's been a requirement for publicly traded companies since the implementation of SOX. The New York Stock Exchange requires companies to have an internal audit function. However, though, in practice at nonprofit organizations, IA has a varying degree of implementation and utilization. So, sorry about that. Okay, so for many large international organizations, for example, some donors may require that your organization has an internal audit department. So those groups, they have had programs in place for many years. However, on the other hand, many small organizations, internal audit may be a brand new concept. So, the goal, wherever your organization falls on that scale, our goal today is to provide you with some insight into what an internal audit function should look like, and some tools to help you implement and enhance your internal audit plans effectively. So, a good place to start is with the 3 lines of defense model. So this is a pretty widely known concept. It's been around for about 20 years. In the traditional model, the first line of defense is the business operations. So these are the day-to-day operations. The individuals responsible for the risk and control environment, falls in this line. So the second line is the oversight function. So this would include your boards, senior level leadership. This line is responsible for strategic risk management, defining roles and responsibility, as well as setting policies and procedures. And finally, the third line, which we're here to talk about today, is the independent assurance function. So the responsibility of this line is to provide management and the board with independent assurance regarding the policies, procedures, and controls implemented by the first 2 lines. in general, the 3 lines of defense should be guided by a high level strategic objectives that help improve the organization's operations and mission success. So it should be, there should be a high level strategy in place that these 3 lines, work together. One thing that I do want to note is the IIA, the Institute of Internal Auditors, is currently seeking comment on the 3 lines of defense model. So, as with most guidance, the model should evolve and organizational, with organizational structures and what's going on in the industry. So, the current model, while it's simple and easy to communicate, it can be somewhat restrictive, and it promotes more of a defensive approach rather than a proactive one. Some of the most advanced or mature internal audit functions that I've seen are responding to risks more proactively and putting controls in place before an event happens. And that's what the IAA is trying to address with this exposure draft. So feel free, you can download the draft and you can comment. So you have the opportunity to get involved and help change some of this guidance right now. So the next slide, just wanted to clarify the difference between internal audit and an external financial statement audit. It's probably fair to say that most of the folks on the webinar have been through an external financial statement audit. So you know that the purpose of the audits is to provide the board, donors, and any other relevant external parties with assurance that the financial statements are not materially misstated. The audits are performed by an independent external CPA. That's a requirement. They provide their report and express an opinion, hopefully an unmodified one, on the financial statements. So, while this type of audit, it does take risk into mind, the focus is primarily on financial statement impact only. So on the other hand, the internal audit differs in that it can be designed and performed in a number of different ways, some of which we'll discuss shortly. Independence is still one of the most important characteristics that an internal audit function should possess. So, internal audit, even though they may be folks within the organization, it's still important to have that independence characteristic. So, there's a variety of different ways, or individuals that can perform the internal audit. So it could be a combination of internal resources and an outside firm. But again, we'll get into that a little later. Okay.
All right.
With that,
we have come. Oh, sorry, Mark. Yeah, we've come to our first polling question. Does your organization have an internal audit function? Yes, no, or currently investigating the concept of internal audit? Please take a moment now to answer. While participants are submitting their answers, I'll provide the first CPE word. The first CPE word is audit. If you want to receive CPE credit, please jot down this word because you will need it for the survey following the webinar. Again, the first CPE word is audit, A-U-D-I-T.
Okay, so sorry, can we go back to those results real quick? Okay, so I'm surprised about the 52%, but I think the 31% is probably about what I would expect. But I'm glad to see that most of you, or there are some that are actually looking into the concept. All right, so internal audit maturity. So there's 5 levels of maturity of an internal audit function, and I want to kind of look at these from the perspective of the people, process, and technology that are involved. And the two lines that we have here on the graph are the risk of failure, or the risk that what's the risk of controls failing or fraud occurring. So that's what that line represents, and the blue line is the realization of value proposition. So how much value is your internal audit department providing back to the organization? So obviously there's an intersection point, but I don't want don't think that that's where you need to be. This is a kind of a moving target, and each organization is different as far as where on this maturity scale you want to be. So as far as the initial level, as far as the people goes, so the resource skills and credentials don't necessarily match the requirements. So you may have people that know the business, they don't know the internal audit process that well, but there is something in place. There's no defined policies, and the audits are being performed manually. So there's manual systems and spreadsheets being used. There's no communication is ad hoc. So it's not, maybe not a formal communication process. And then there's no follow-up. So we perform the audits, and then there's no real follow-up on any recommendations that come out of it. So that you can see, so the value is low, the risk is high there. Pretty self-explanatory. As far as the next level, so the repeatable level, so again, we're improving as far as the people are concerned. There's some specialized skills and credentials that are being utilized. The policies are defined, but they may not be documented. There are fairly effective systems in place, and communication and reporting processes are a little better. So they may be in place, but again, not formally documented. And then we move to the defined level. So again, people are improving once more. Appropriate skills are in place. This time we're implementing some type of training. So our internal audit folks are being trained, not only on internal audit, but also on the various business processes that they might be auditing. There are effective systems in place. Maybe there's an audit management software in place. There's some planning tools being utilized, and then policies are defined and documented. Managed. So managed, again, there are people have the appropriate skills. The training is more targeted and specialized. So, not only are we training on internal audit and various business processes, but we're really digging down and having a better understanding of the specific business process that we're reviewing. Policies are communicated regularly. Data integrity is high, and there may even be some automated reporting and monitoring going on. So optimized is the goal. I haven't seen a lot of internal audit functions that reach this level. But in this level, you have SMEs that are identified, so subject matter experts are identified and utilized within the audit department and the organization. Training is monitored, so you have people with certifications that need to keep their CPE up that are part of the group. So it's strictly monitored. There's succession planning in place for the audit function. The policies are continuously being monitored for any updates to ensure that any emerging or leading practices are being incorporated. So this is a kind of a hot topic buzzword, but data mining is being used extensively. And again, another one is continuous auditing and monitoring processes are in place. So that's just some of the characteristics of the different levels of where an internal audit function could lie. The most important thing to remember about the scale is that while the optimized is the goal, less advanced maturity levels are still adding value to the organization. So having an initial maturity level is better than not having one at all. So I think that's important to stress. The most important piece in my eyes is that you want to have that board, that audit committee, that management, buy-in, and everyone needs to be on the same page as far as what the expectations of the department are. The key term that we hear all the time is that internal audit should have a seat at the table. Richard Chambers, who's the head of the IIA, has his trusted advisors concept. He's got a book out there. It's good reading, and it's good. It gives you a good idea of what he sees an internal audit function being. All right.
Great. That brings us to our next polling question. So for those of you that have an internal audit function, where do you believe you fall on the maturity scale? Initial, repeatable, defined, managed, or optimized? Please take a moment now to answer. While participants are submitting their answers, I'll provide the second CPE word. The CPE word is scale. If you want to receive CPE credit, please jot down this word because you'll need it for the end of the survey following the webinar. Again, the second CPE word is scale, S-C-A-L-E.
All right. So initial, good. That's definitely definitely what I would expect. So, you know, I think, like I said, it's the initial is not a bad level to be at. I mean, you know, you have to start somewhere, and it's good that the organization is thinking about internal audit and getting the function put in place. Okay. So internal audit models. So there are, you know, so along with the 5 different maturity levels, there are different ways that you can structure your internal audit function. And that's what I want to talk about on this slide. So the first of which is an individual process risk review. So this is less of a, think of this more as just ad hoc kind of audits or reviews taking place. It's not necessarily setting up a whole department or function, more specialized reviews that focus solely on one process or audit area. The next would be, you know, a completely in-house internal audit function. So again, this is a, you know, it's a function staffed entirely with folks that work for the organization. You know, some pros and cons. Obviously, the pros are that you have people that understand the organization. Some cons would be maybe they don't have the expertise or the knowledge about internal audit in general, or, you know, like an ERM process. You know, they may not have those expertise, but they know the organization well. So that brings us to co-source. So a co-sourced internal audit model is one that I see a lot, and one that I think, you know, can add the most value on any of the, you know, different you know, maturity levels. So this is where you have, you know, internal audit staff from the organization, as well as, you know, outside expertise or outside consultants that provide advice and knowledge about the internal audit function. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds in this one, in my eyes. You're getting the expertise of the organization from those internally staffed folks, and you're also getting, you know, the expertise of the outside consultant that knows internal audit, knows the industry, knows what's going on, and can keep, you know, the internal folks abreast to all those risks and challenges. The next model, I don't see this one as much, but again, it's out there, where you would have like an outsourced CAE. So I know a lot of my clients, they have like outsourced CFOs or outsourced controllers. So it's the same idea. It's just that this is an outsourced CAE, you know, chief audit executive. So it's you know, not the person necessarily doing the audits, but they help design and put together the internal audit plan. It definitely gives you that along with the co-source internal audit model, it gives you that independence that, you know, that should be important to the board, that they want to see for that independent assurance. This helps you get there. And finally, you know, the outsourced internal audit function, self-explanatory, completely outsourced. Again, pros and cons. You know, maybe you don't have as much of the internal expertise and knowledge, but you do have, you know, that outsourced consultant that knows the industry and you know, the emerging risks. And again, consulting internally can help make this model successful. All right.
All right, great. We've come to our next polling question. What internal model does your organization utilize? Individual risk process review, so more of an ad hoc type of reporting structure, or in-house internal audit, co-sourced internal audit, or fully outsourced internal audit model? Please take a moment now to answer. While participants are submitting their answers, I'll provide a CPE word. The CPE word is risk. If you want to receive CPE credit, please jot this word down because you'll need to fill it out at the end of the survey. Again, the final CPE word is risk, R-I-S-K.
Okay, this is Andreas Alexandru again, and in the industry trends piece of this presentation, I want to give a little bit of background in the context of risk and why audit is important in mitigating that risk, specifically internal audit, and what are the kinds of things that we've seen through our experience that are important to be considering in your internal audit plan. So just as a matter of background and focusing in on risk, there are a variety of risks in operating both domestically and internationally that, again, that internal audit should be focused on. And as far as what are the specific areas that an organization should be considering when evaluating risk. And some of the more common risk areas for organizations operating, again, both domestically and internationally, are the inability to have good, competent staff that really understand what the responsibilities are and what is expected of them. And so that is a significant risk because your staff are really the most important part of the success of your organization. And so proper onboarding is one of the risk mitigating considerations, and taking time in onboarding people and finding the right competencies and performing the right background checks and other kinds of activities on your employees or those that you intend on hiring is really an important risk mitigation factor. Poor financial controls can lead to a variety of exposures, including fraud, impropriety, other kinds of corruption that ultimately could be detrimental to the viability of the organization or the success of our programs or other. And again, ensuring that we do have good financial controls in place over purchasing, good financial controls over banking, good financial controls over protection of assets and other kinds of assets of the organization. Really making sure that we have good financial controls in place is really critical to the success of any organization. It's a very high risk area. Another, and again, in the context of this particular slide, and we have the large word compliance in here, and I'll talk a little bit more detail on compliance in just a few moments, but compliance is one of the top 5 risk areas for any organization, and compliance comes in a variety of different forms, and it includes internal and external regulations and other kinds of policies and procedures that need to be followed. But there's also local compliance as far as tax compliance, uniform guidance compliance with U.S. government rules and regulations, foreign government rules and regulations, and any other regulatory compliance areas that really need to be adhered to by the organization. And again, having strong, robust reviews and included in your internal audit plan, and testing and making sure that we are compliant in these areas is really the most important part of this discussion. And following compliance regulations specific to, again, foreign government, U.S. government, and other donor requirements, again, in the context of making sure that we are compliant with those requirements, including background checks and other types of local statutory requirements, is really the key element of compliance. Another important risk, again, that should be considered, just poor accounting, not having a good accounting system in place, not having good policies and procedures around how we account and report. Certainly there are a variety of ways to mitigate the risk, but training, again, staff onboarding is important too. Having good, competent staff is really a risk mitigation factor and an important part of the internal audit plan. And some of the emerging risk areas, and again also tangentially related to compliance, include cyber and IT risks, weaknesses in your IT infrastructure and in your in your IT environment, leading to cyber crimes and other kinds of things that you're hearing more and more about on a day-to-day basis. And internal audit can also certainly assist in making sure that we do have all of the the required pieces in place to ensure that we are protecting ourselves against, to the best of our ability, protecting ourselves against the potential for losses and other kinds of things that could be prevented through strong procedures and following policy, and making sure that, again, throughout the organization, we are following what we're supposed to be following on a day-to-day basis. Other kinds of emerging risks also having an enterprise risk management plan in place and not following the requirements. Again, training is important, and making sure that everyone is on board with our enterprise risk management plans. Specific to compliance, there are a variety of areas, and again, from one state to another, from one country to another, from one donor to another, as far as what's required of an organization. Some of the key compliance areas that we see that many organizations struggle through. One of the most significant ones is procurement. And procurement, without getting into too much detail, that's not the core of this webinar today, but procurement is an action whereby an organization ensures that it has a proper level of due diligence with respect to the engagement of third-party vendors and contractors and others in the context of an exchange transaction or something we're acquiring, or services that we're acquiring, and ensuring that the organization does follow its policies and procedures, and making sure that we do have strong policy and procedures in place, and that they're in line with what's expected of the organization. It should be a key ingredient in the internal audit plan, and making sure that you're following through exactly how the organization has laid out in its policies and procedures, what the required steps are, and how those steps have been followed, and how the documentation is supported is critical to the success of this area. And what I mean by supported is not specific to external audit, because as we know, external auditors do spend a fair amount of time ensuring that compliance has been met, but on the for the purpose of internal audit, as a part of our internal audit plan, there should be a robust review process with respect to all compliance areas, but this one in particular. Procurement is a very high risk area for an organization, both from a compliance standpoint and from an optics standpoint. We need to ensure compliance in this particular area. And another common risk area, subgrant monitoring. Organizations do in fact provide assistance to other third-party organizations for the purpose of administering their activities, and compliance in this area has been known to be, just as we, through our own experiences, weaker than is expected, and certainly making sure that the relationships between the organization and any third parties that we have engaged to carry out our mission and our purpose through third-party assistance awards, that we have complied with all the terms and conditions that we have laid out in our own policies and procedures, but also what our donors expect of us. And internal audit one of the roles of internal audit is to ensure that when there are reviews of documentation and other kinds of metrics for following subgrant monitoring, that they're all properly documented. And again, a very important part of the internal audit plan. And just, one more piece here on compliance, vetting and background checks and compliance with USA Patriot Act and other requirements. Again, this is in a very important area, in ensuring that internal audit is focused on internal compliance and documenting that the organization has followed U.S. government requirements. Every organization is required to comply with USA Patriot Act, but ensuring that that is a part of the internal audit plan is definitely very important. And through just focused on international organizations for just a moment, the internal audit plan certainly should have a variety of pieces to some of the activities performed when a site visit is being performed. So when the internal audit team or an internal auditor is visiting a branch office of a U.S. company or a foreign organization, visiting a local country office, there are procedures that should be followed and documented in the internal audit plan. Some of the things that, again, and we've talked about some of them already, but what's critical is verifying that policies and procedures are documented, that they're being followed, that they're understood and communicated throughout the organization. Typically speaking, policy and procedures are developed at the headquarters level. It's the expectation that all the way down to the branch office or the local country office level, that those policies and procedures will be followed. And that's not always the case. Our experience is that when we're performing on-site visits of branch offices of foreign organizations or of subgrantees of U.S. organizations, that the policy and procedures have not been properly communicated. Again, the internal audit plan should include a really robust review of policy and procedures and compliance from top all the way down to the bottom. The bottom meaning the not the lowest level, but the final level where payments are being made in the internal control environment. It could potentially be the weakest. Some of the other activities that are important in internal audit to a certain degree is verifying that what the organization is expected to be delivering in the form of projects or other deliverables, whether it be the construction of a road or a hospital or a well or other kind of water point or any kind of deliverable in the local country office or other regional office, that there has been some inspection activities being performed and that the overall report that shows what we've accomplished has been actually accomplished. So site visits of projects should be considered as a part of the internal audit plan as well. And again, a fair amount of what we do when we are performing both external and internal audit reviews for our clients on site is just that, verifying that where possible that projects have been completed, or at least there's existence or evidence that projects have been completed. Inventory management, also an area, again, when it comes down to some of the site visit activities that the internal audit team should be performing. Physical inspection is really an important part of that process. In addition to reviewing policies and conducting interviews and taking a look at sample transactions and documenting compliance with internal procedures, documenting compliance with donor expectations and others that are funding the organization. It really is an integral part of the internal audit plan. I also want to spend just a moment of time talking about some of the other, again, back to the concept of risk here, and in the context of international, and making sure that from the standpoint of compliance that the organization has considered what the potential risks of the organization could be if it has not complied with its donor requirements. We are, many organizations, international organizations, are funded by USAID and state and other federal agencies, and there's some very important and mandatory requirements included in CFR 200 that no matter what level of giving the organization is receiving from federal agencies, compliance must be adhered to at every dollar level. Whether or not there's a uniform guidance audit or not is irrelevant. The minute we accept any federal assistance, we're required to comply. And that extends out to foreign governments and others. And why is this important? Well, because of the success of the award and the future funding. If there's an opportunity for continued funding, is really contingent upon the success, both programmatically and financially. And that also, again, should be factored into some of the internal audit activities that are being performed by the internal audit group of the organization. But some of the risk areas that should be looked at include the identification through the enterprise risk management activities of the organization, what the highest risk areas are. And certain donors, including, just as an example, the UK aid agency DFID, they're looking very closely at how organizations are not only documenting risk through an enterprise risk management playbook or enterprise risk management plans, but also looking at lower level risk registers and other risk identification plans, and ensuring that the internal audit team has spent time in reviewing on an ongoing basis and documenting how those risks are identified and how risks are mitigated is certainly something that we should be very mindful of. And so donor compliance is critical, again, in the context of risk and identifying risk and testing risk throughout the organization. Okay. Back to you, Mark Tesser.
All right. Thank you, Andreas. So we've talked about the different models, the different maturity levels. We've talked about what's going on in the industry, the varying, different risks that internal audit should be addressing. So I just wanted to highlight, some of the benefits. I mean, there's a lot of benefits here. So these are just some of the more important ones that I've pulled out. The first one, obviously, improved processes and controls. I mean, this one's pretty self-explanatory. But internal audit performs procedures. They develop reports and provide findings and recommendations to help improve internal controls and processes and procedures. The next one, smoother system implementation. So I'm pretty sure that everyone on the line can express their pains with implementing new systems. To my point earlier about internal audit having a seat at the table, it's important that you do that during these system implementations. Internal audit can provide insight into the different controls that should be in place in new systems, and it's important to do that on the front end. And you'll really see the value added when you do that on the front end, rather than having to go back and modify systems after they've been implemented. So compliance with laws and regulations, again, I'm not going to touch too much here. I mean, Andreas laid out a lot of the different compliance aspects and risks that internal audit can help address. The next box here, preparation for external audits. So depending on the type of work you're doing, your external auditor actually may be able to rely on some of the internal audit work. Not only that, but performing internal audits gets the business units ready for an external audit. So they're more aware of the type of questions that are going to be asked. They're more prepared in general. Improved risk management strategies. So as we talked about in today's environment, there's an increased focus and attention from donors as well as oversight agencies and boards, as to how an organization is managing risk. So, as we talked about, internal audit can provide leadership with that independent assurance on the compliance, with an organization's internal controls, as well as the effectiveness in mitigating those risks. So board assurance. So again, the board has a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that there are adequate controls and systems in place. So the internal audit function just adds to the board's comfort level as to that responsibility. Third-party risk management. Again, this is an area that internal audit can be valuable. They can be a liaison between management and third parties to ensure that there are adequate controls in place at the third parties that you're working with. Strategic planning. Again, internal audit can provide a second set of eyes to help leadership plan for the future. So not only on a day-to-day, risk and control mitigation level, but also big picture. Where's the organization heading? What risks are we going to encounter down the road that we need to help mitigate? Again, it kind of goes hand in hand with an ERM function, along with the internal audit plan and universe. Improved culture. So this is kind of an interesting one, but I think if you really think about it, it makes sense. A lot of people, their initial reaction of another auditor coming around is not a good one. But in actuality, internal audit helps to provide some accountability within the organization. It helps management and leadership communicate more effectively and address concerns, contemporaneously. So they're addressing these issues, and the communication lines are open, and the accountability is there. And finally, greater transparency in donor reporting. So again, I haven't seen this too much, but I have seen, some internal audit reports being disseminated to donors. Some donors want to see specific types of reporting coming from internal audit. So again, it's just another benefit that internal audit can provide. So where do we start? So, this is just kind of a high level, flow of what, an internal audit department would look like. Again, this is kind of a holistic view of what an entire universe and plan would look like. So, like I said earlier, the first and foremost, you want to get buy-in from senior leadership and the board. That's most important. If you don't have that, it's really hard to be effective as an internal audit department. There's got to be support, from the top down. So, following along the boxes on the left, so, you could do risk assessment surveys, you evaluate your inherent risk as a whole, and with all the different processes within the organization. So you see the next kind of level from that first level is, you're looking at your process universe, your risk universe, as well as your location universe, especially if you have, if you're an international NGO and you have locations all over the world, you may develop your audit plan and your audit approach based on, countries or regions that are most risky. So then, from there, you would develop, your different audit areas, and you would draft an audit plan. So what are we going to look at? What are the most, risky areas that need to be addressed? Whether that's an annual audit plan, the more innovative audit functions that are out there, they're more agile. They can respond to different risks that come up throughout the year. So it's not necessarily a set it and forget it type of idea with the audit plan. You do want to be able to have some flexibility as far as what's being looked at. And I just wanted to touch a little bit on, some different tools that can be used. So, the IIA website is a great resource. There's a lot of good information out there. They have their Red Book, which is all the internal audit standards that should be followed. The Quality Assurance and Improvement Program, also known as the Blue Book, another great resource that has a lot of what a good internal audit department should have. As well as there's all types of practice guides out there. So if you remember, all this stuff is available to you. The Red Book and the Quality Assurance and Improvement Program manual. There are costs associated with those, but they're relatively low. The practice guides are free. I also would recommend getting involved with the local chapters. You become an IIA member, and then you can become a member of the local chapter, attend the meetings, and get an understanding of what other organizations are going through.
Okay, great. That brings us to the next polling question. Which of the following audits should be included in your internal audit plan for 2020? And if you don't have an internal audit department, what of these particular risk areas do you think your organization needs to look deeper into? What we're seeing in ERM is some of the top risks we've listed here: cybersecurity and privacy. A lot of organizations have updated their privacy policies on their websites. We are seeing a lot of activity regarding auditing against those privacy policies to make sure they're actually in compliance with what they're telling their donors or members on the website. A lot more risk reviews are being done over HR and culture risks or internal audit projects. This is a broad range of different types of reviews. It could be looking into specific whistleblower, anti-retaliation. It can be also talent management if an organization's seen a lot of turnover, looking into what may be causing that, or maybe they're not bringing in the right people, a lot of turnover within the first year. So we're seeing a lot of deep dives there. Digital transformation is probably the #1 risk right now that we're seeing, as well as system conversions. Oh, it looks like I'm seeing the results now. It looks like 33% cybersecurity and privacy. I'm not surprised to see that. And then a lot more are looking into other compliance-related audits, which probably likely tie into a lot of what Andreas covered earlier. So thank you for your results.
All right, thanks, Melissa. So just going to cruise through these last couple slides here. We did want to give you kind of an example of an internal audit plan. So you see there's a lot of different topics here. Again, don't want to dive in too much in the interest of time, but you can kind of see, you know, what an example internal audit plan would look like. You know, you would come up with your budget for your hours, and you would budget annually on how much time you want to spend, you know, in each area. Finally, we did want to talk a little bit about a case study, just as far as what one particular audit would look like, what steps would you go through. And again, you know, these 6 steps here are pretty standard. You could do this for any type of you know, audit. They're very high level, very simple, but it's the same idea for any type of process you'd be looking at. So again, you know, that's here for your reference. And if you have any questions, feel free to certainly reach out.
All right, great. Well, before we wrap up today, we want to answer a few of the questions submitted by our online participants. The first one is, we are a small nonprofit. How can we implement some level of internal audit on a limited budget?
Sure. So I can address that one, Melissa. You know, basically, you know, like we talked about, I think, you know, for a lot of the smaller groups, an outsourced model, you know, or a combination of a co-sourcing model can really help save money. You know, the outs, you know, you gotta, you know, talk to someone that you trust in the industry, you know, get an idea of what you're trying to do, and be able to lay it out and say, here's my resources, here's what we want to do, here's what we want to accomplish. And then, you know, have that conversation and talk about budget. What are we looking at? And I'm sure, you know, whoever you consult with is going to be able to help you out.
All right, thanks, Mark. This one was to Andreas. What % of your international internal audit clients have implemented internal audit as part of their ongoing activities, and how do you see that function working out for them?
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, I found that the majority of our international NGO clients do not have a formalized internal audit function. And while there are certain individuals within the organization that act in that capacity, you know, the formalizing of the internal audit department and the internal audit plan is really critical to the again, the transparency of the organization with donors and others, and also making sure that the identified risks have been attended to on an ongoing basis. But we believe that, again, as the risk climate is changing continuously from one day to the next, the importance of internal audit really should be at the forefront, and an organization should take a stronger approach to formalizing an internal audit function.
All right, thank you, Andreas. And with that, we'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We encourage you to follow us on social media, connect with us on LinkedIn, and visit our website at www.grfcpas.com for upcoming events and alerts. As you see on the screen here, we are pleased to be partnering with NC State for our first annual ERM and nonprofit organizations workshop. Join us for a 2-day workshop led by NC State's ERM initiative and featuring some real-world illustrations of ERM by nonprofit leaders from organizations such as Catholic Relief Services and AARP. We hope to see you there. Please remember to complete the emailed survey that follows if you would like to earn CPE credit for today's webinar. Thank you again for attending, and have a great day.